An IAEA report says that Iran has mastered the critical steps necessary to design and construct a nuclear weapon. In the midst of rising tension and saber-rattling between Tehran and the West, could this be a new phase in the confrontation with Iran? And is the IAEA totally free from external influence? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Adrian Finnegan. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said that any possible Israeli military strike against Iran would be a very serious mistake, adding that such action would have unpredictable consequences. Lavrov's comments followed an Israeli threat by President Shimon Peres that an attack on Iran is becoming more likely. It also comes after Western diplomats were briefed on the latest report by the IAEA detailing Iran's nuclear capabilities. The report includes allegations that Iranian engineers have had Soviet training to build detonators for triggering a nuclear chain reaction. From Tehran, Dorsa Jabari reports.
A quiet day on the streets of Tehran as most Iranians celebrate the Muslim holiday of Eid. But the international pressure on the Islamic Republic is growing by the day. The International Atomic Energy Agency is set to release its latest and most detailed report yet on Iran's nuclear program. A report that is already raising serious concerns in the West, but being dismissed by Iranian officials.
We know what the truth is. Let them publish them and we'll see what happens. Will they not be called into question as an agency that is under pressure by foreign powers?
While Iranians are quick to dismiss the IAEA's report, Israel is not taking it as lightly. The country's prime minister and president have suggested that Israel may be getting closer to a military strike against Iran.
I believe so. I estimate that intelligence services of all these countries are looking at the ticking clock, warning leaders that there is not much time left. I'm not sure that they reached any conclusions.
And that's a threat many here in the Iranian capital are not taking seriously.
Of course, I'm worried about the threat of war, but I believe in God. If some countries are accusing us of having certain types of weapons, they need to prove it with the required documents.
We don't listen to Israel as we don't believe this country exists. It is a country supported by the United States, and that is becoming more and more clear now. They have made such threats over and over again in the past, and yet they have done nothing. Our nation is very brave, and we are not scared of them.
These threats can never be effective. We are powerful enough to confront Israel, and this is an issue that has been repeated many times.
But Russia, a longtime ally of Iran, is warning against any military action.
Military intervention only leads to more deaths and more suffering. There is no military solution to the Iranian nuclear issue, as there is no such solution to any other problem in the modern world. This is being confirmed to us every day when we see how the problems of the conflicts around Iran are being resolved, whether Iraq or Afghanistan or what is happening in other countries in the region.
This rhetoric against the Islamic Republic has been around for years, and Iran has been using its own rhetoric against the West for decades. But regardless of threats made, sanctions imposed, or reports published, most Iranians believe that the pursuit of a peaceful nuclear program is within their rights, no matter how high the price. Dorsa Jabari, Al Jazeera, Tehran.
Just last week, on November 3rd, Iran's Foreign Minister Ali Akbar Salehi warned the US that it should think twice before it enters a collision course with Tehran over its nuclear program. He said the US has unfortunately lost its wisdom and prudence in dealing with international issues. It only depends now on power. Of course, we are prepared for the worst, but we hope that they will think twice before they put themselves on a collision course with Iran. PJ Crowley is a former State Department spokesperson. He says that if Iran crosses the line between civilian and military nuclear programs, that will be a cause for concern for the whole region.
Crossing that line between a civilian nuclear program and a military program that calls for an aggressive response by the international community. Now, on the one hand, can military action be among those options? It can, and appropriately so. That said, is the military option ideal? It is not, by any means. And quickly you can envision scenarios that will spin in a lot of different directions, none of them leading to stability in the region.
Well, let's bring in now our guests. In Vienna, Robert Kelly, he's a former director of the International Atomic Energy Agency. In Beirut, Mohamed Marandi, associate professor of American Studies at the University of Tehran. And in Brussels, Joshua Goodman, the communications director of the Transatlantic Institute. Gentlemen, welcome to you all. Robert Kelly, first of all, given that the IAEA has had very limited access to Iran, upon what information do you think it will have based this report? Where's that information come from?
It would seem like most of the information on weapons is coming from the United States or from its allies. This is information that's been coming to the agency for about 7 years, and much of it is extremely dated. The information that has leaked out, particularly through the Washington Post and others, seems to describe the agency's report entirely, and everything that's being described in there are things that are well known and been discussed in the press for years. So I'm a little at a loss to know why this is something new.
So an organization conceived as a purely technical organization is about to produce a report that's based on what? Detective work, logic, intuition, or murky intelligence reports?
Well, murky intelligence reports, I guess, is fair. The main problem with the intelligence reports is that the sources aren't clear. If you look at the documents that IAEA is evaluating, the information contained in those documents looks very serious. But you have no idea who wrote the documents, whether they're genuinely Iranian, whether they came from Iran, or whether they're forgeries. We in the IAEA have had to deal with forgeries on a number of occasions. 1993-94, we received forgeries that Iraq was restarting its program. We were able to see those documents weren't genuine. We had the same problem in 2002 with information leading up to the Second Iraq War. So you have to be a little skeptical and at least wonder where this is coming from and wonder why it can't be better sourced.
Mohamed Marandi, in Beirut, does this not smack dangerously, do you think, of 2003 when US intelligence agencies, bearing in mind what Robert Kelly was just saying there, built a case for military intervention in Iraq based on intelligence that was plain wrong?
Well, there are certain similarities and certain differences. The intelligence, of course, back then wasn't wrong. It was dishonest and forged. But the difference is that Iran is not Iraq, and the United States is not the United States of 2003. But beyond that, it is quite similar. The information that the Americans have provided to the IAEA this is the same laptop that was discussed years ago in your own program as well. This information comes from the United States, but the United States never gave it to the IAEA nor to Iran. Iran has repeatedly called for the United States to allow independent experts, computer experts, to analyze the laptop, and the United States refused. And this, for the Iranians, is evidence that this is a fraud. On the other hand, even Mr. al-Baradei, despite the enormous pressure upon him by the United States and other Western countries, he had serious reservations about the authenticity of these so-called documents. But unfortunately, the new head of the IAEA, he is, if you look at the WikiLeaks documents, he is very close to the United States, and he has taken a position completely in opposition to that of Mr. al-Baradei. And unfortunately, he is causing a situation where the agency is losing its credibility in the eyes of many people, and especially Iranians.
Joshua Goodman, in Brussels, how susceptible is the IAEA to political pressure?
Well, I mean, the real question is, the IAEA collects information, and as it was stated, they collect it from intelligence agencies, and it's at their discretion to assess it and to assess the viability of it. The real question is, what does the Security Council do with the information it's given, as it's reported by the Director General of the IAEA? And that's a discussion that obviously politics play a role. For example, less than 2 weeks ago, it was reported that this actual report itself wouldn't be released to the public because under pressure from China and Russia, and now clearly we're going to get the report within the coming hours or in the next day or so. So obviously politics plays a game, and how the information is used is susceptible to the interests of various parties in the Security Council.
Robert Kelly in Vienna, what can you add to that as a former director of the IAEA? I mean, how free of political pressure is the IAEA? Is political pressure felt at every level throughout the organization?
It's felt at many levels. I'm sure that the Director General feels tremendous political pressure from agencies that fund him and keep him in power, if you will. It's felt all the way down to the bottom. I know 3 inspectors who've been banned from Iran are no longer to go there, possibly to some extent over an honest misunderstanding, but also they got caught up in the heavy-duty politics, and they're banned. They can't go there anymore. That affects someone's career. It affects where they work. They have to be transferred to other operations because they can no longer do their job. So it's a major problem up and down the organization. And you see it in the opposite side, too. You see in the case of Fukushima, where the IAEA did very little for a very long time rather than put out information that could embarrass the Japanese.
Mohammad Marandi, would the Iranian government perhaps take the heat out of all of this by allowing IAEA inspectors back in to prove that they're not up to what this report is going to suggest that they are?
Well, in the past, the Iranians, in fact, almost effectively, completely stopped the nuclear program for about 2 years. They not only halted anything linked to enrichment, but they effectively shut down everything in the country, in the hope that the United States and England, France, and Germany would come to their senses and recognize that the Iranian nuclear program is peaceful and to come to some sort of agreement with Iran. The Iranians effectively implemented the additional protocol. They allowed inspectors to go throughout the country, and many installations were inspected that had nothing to do with the nuclear program, and the Iranians felt that the Americans were feeding the agency information so that they could gather intelligence on Iranian military installations. But still, they went through this for 2 years. When nothing came out of it, the Iranians felt forced to go back to the nuclear program, because after all, they've spent billions of dollars of this. This goes back before the revolution. Tens of thousands of people were trained in this field. They can't simply just shut down a program because Western countries are opposed to it. Iran is a sovereign country. It's an independent country, and this is simply something that cannot be done. But just 2 small points that I'd like to mention here. One is that Western news agencies repeatedly say that there's new information. All this information is old information, and it existed beforehand in the agency. And in the past, it was not considered authentic, as I said before. But unfortunately, the agency, which is not a democratic body, it is, for the most part, the board is run or controlled by Western countries. And just like the UN Security Council, it does not reflect the will of the international community.
Joshua Goodman in Brussels, given that both Robert Kelly and Mohammad Marandi have said that this information is nothing new, what can we read into the timing of the release of this information?
It's an interesting question, and that one that's not very clear at this moment. Certainly, Iran is back in the headlines in the news, which can provide an impetus for increased focus on its nuclear program. I think following over the summer, the focus was put on the Palestinian declaration of statehood at the United Nations, but the recent alleged assassination attempt on the Saudi ambassador, which has been linked to Iran, the Saudi ambassador in Washington, has brought Iran back to the front and perhaps caused the international community to look a little more closely at the information. I mean, there are a number of theories we could discuss, one possibly being that it took this long for whichever intelligence agency collected the information to verify it, or for the IAEA to verify its legitimacy. There are a number of theories out there, but certainly one would suspect that the fact that Iran is back on the headlines and back in the focus of the international community certainly played a role.
Robert Kelly, how much of the controversy surrounding this report can be put down to the very different management styles, do you think, of the current director of the IAEA, Yukiya Amano, and the former director, Mohammad El-Baradei, who said that the threat of Iran developing a bomb has been hyped?
Well, I think El-Baradei was a skeptic. I think El-Baradei had 12 years in the leadership seat of the IAEA, and he'd been burned very badly by bad intelligence. In the case of Iraq, I think he felt really bad that the agency was not able to do its job and that they were given information that was no good. We wasted a huge amount of time sorting out information that was bad and never got to the rest of the problem. Amano is a relative newcomer. I think he's going to have to learn the hard way that people are using him, that they're giving him false information and using him as a mouthpiece. The report that he put out on Syria, for example, referring them to the Security Council, is unacceptably bad. It's filled with mistakes and it's filled with information that was clearly planted and given to him to analyze. With respect to the documents in Iran, I do want to say that I'm not saying they're not genuine, and I'm not saying that the things that are revealed in them are not very concerning if they are true. The problem is we just don't know where they came from, and so we have to take that with a grain of salt.
Mohammed Marandi, a senior Iranian official labelled Mr. Amano as biased last year. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Oh, definitely. I think that it's clear he owes his job to the United States. The WikiLeaks documents that have come out clearly indicate his very cozy relationship to the U.S. government. And it is unfortunate, especially since the IAEA is dominated at all levels. Even ordinary bureaucrats there are mostly Western or linked to the West in one way or another. And the world, the international community is not democratically represented there in the first place. And this sort of behavior on his part, by basically accepting whatever the Americans feed him, is only going to make the situation much worse. And the dishonesty of the bogus claims made by the United States regarding the so-called assassination attempt on the Saudi ambassador, which no one believes and which is completely untrue. If you look at the evidence and the allegations, they just don't add up. This itself, in the eyes of Iranians, indicates that the Americans are working on different fronts to accuse Iran, to intimidate Iran, to make Iran guilty of everything in this world except for perhaps global warming, so that they could justify new sanctions, so that they could put pressure on the Iranian people. And the irony of it all is that the Iranians are themselves the victims of weapons of mass destruction. Chemical weapons used by Saddam Hussein killed many thousands of Iranians. I was a victim of those chemical weapons given to Saddam Hussein by these very same countries. Germany, France, England, and the United States were all guilty. Yet it is the Iranians who have never used weapons of mass destruction, never produced weapons of mass destruction, and people in Iran are still dying as a result of the weapons used against them. It is Iran that is accused here, and instead of being the victim, they have somehow been turned into some sort of aggressor.
Joshua Goodman in Brussels, the revelations in this report, although as Robert Kelly says, are nothing new, they provide Western nations with a fair amount of ammunition to pressure Iran with. How do you think they're going to use that?
Well, first of all, I think we need to clarify that this is not simply a campaign launched by the West against Iran. The nuclear file was referred to the IAEA through the Security Council, which means at minimum with the agreement of Russia and China. We're not Western nations. So this is certainly something that the international community as a whole, and not an East-West divide, agrees is an issue of concern. And all punitive measures taken in the Security Council have been with the agreement of Russia and China. Certainly there is discussion and disagreement between the parties as to the severity of the measure. Sure.
The non-aligned movement consists of the majority of the countries of the world. They are completely opposed to these actions. But my understanding, and the understanding of many, is that the majority of the countries in the world, therefore, do not consist of the international community. In other words, the major powers, which are, by the way, for the most part, white European males, they're the ones who are the international community. They are both judge, jury, and they put people into prison based upon their own evidence and their own assessment. But it's very unfortunate to see that the non-aligned movement, which consists of so many countries, is never in the Western media considered at all.
Joshua Goodman, do you want to come back?
I mean, I'm not. Yes, sir. I'm not going to comment on those accusations because they're slightly absurd. But my point was is that there are elements from around the world that are concerned, and within the Arab world, which we saw through the WikiLeaks and other reports, and particularly particularly Saudi Arabia. I mean, there is universal concern about the Iran nuclear program. It's not every country, and we could have a poll to see if it is uniformly around the world, or is even the majority of the members of the United Nations. The point is that this is not simply a Western campaign, and there is concern by many. What will happen now that the information, which whether new or not, is certainly damning if proven correct? Certainly, President Obama has already hinted that new sanctions are in the cards, and particularly strong ones. It's a question of the Security Council seems unlikely to pass much stronger sanctions, maybe a few, or maybe adjusting the current sanctions package. But whether the European Union goes along is really the issue, and I think discussions will take place over the coming weeks. There's the EU-US summit is set to take place at the end of the month, so I would imagine this will make it onto the agenda, whether in public discussions or in private, closed-door dialogues.
Speaking of the Security Council, Robert Kelly, Russia and China have sent a diplomatic protest to Mr. Amano, urging him not to make details of the evidence in this report public. Why would they have done that?
Well, one of the arguments I heard that was a bit circular was that the information in the documents could help the Iranians build a bomb, but if we believe the information came from Iran, then there's no problem with showing it to them. That's one of the stories that's floating around out there. The Russians may be concerned because we heard in your opening piece that a Russian scientist went and helped the Iranians, and they probably would like to hear the whole truth, that I think he went back to Russia in the year 2000, 11 years ago. So while that is interesting information that a Russian went and helped them and may have given them some very important assistance, it was a long time ago, and what's new?
What about the timing of the report, then? The question that I put to Joshua Goodman earlier, I'll put to you. Is the IAEA being pressured by nations such as the US, Saudi Arabia even, to be more forthcoming about its suspicions, to get rid of the cautious language that we had under Mohammed al-Baradei?
Well, I think this is a response to the bad information that was issued about Iraq. Now you're talking about a case where let's put all the information on the table, let's let everybody see it and see it whole. The timing, I think, is driven by two things. One is pressure on IAEA to do it from member states, but the other part of the timing is what you saw with the, for example, large piece in the Washington Post the other day. A lot of people out there are in possession of very juicy leaks that have been given them by the IAEA and by governments. And those juicy leaks are not going to be worth anything after this report comes out, because everybody's going to know what it was in those leaks.
Mohammed Morandi in Beirut, do you want to come in?
Yes, I just wanted to point out that it is very important to keep in mind that all this information is old information. The Iranians responded to this in detail in a 117-page document in 2007, I believe. The evidence is just from the United States. It is a computer file. The Iranians have shown how the documents are inconsistent. Even the Persian is inaccurate, and there are many mistakes in the documents themselves. The point is that the United States is trying to force the agency and to force the UN Security Council to take a position against Iran because of the United States, its irrational attitude towards Iran. American relations with Iran have been very poor, but the United States has become, in the eyes of Iranians, a very irrational actor. And this, if the United States continues to push Iran or try to impose new sanctions, the Iranians will respond in kind. And taking into account the current situation in the Middle East, it will not be good for the United States, and taking into account the global economy and the crises that Europeans and Americans are facing, it's not going to be good for anyone. So the best solution is for the United States to behave more rationally, and for the IAEA to behave more independently and unbiased.
Okay, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it there. Many thanks indeed. Robert Kelly, in Vienna, Mohamed Marandi in Beirut, and Joshua Goodman in Brussels. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. As always, we welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.com. The news is next here on Al Jazeera. From me, Adrian Finnegan. Bye for now.